Salutations. Back in mid-December, I made an address illustrating the water crisis currently plaguing the capital city of Hawaii, that being Honolulu, and a vast majority of the island of Oahu. To reiterate, once more, and there has been a long history of this, the United States Navy, which occupies Pearl Harbor, has engaged in an act of mass negligence as related to a World War II era fuel storage facility located at Red Hill. The Red Hill fuel storage facility withholds approximately 250 million gallons of jet fuel, diesel, gasoline, and rests a mere 100 feet above the Red Hill aquifer that a majority of the over 1 million residents who reside in Oahu rely upon for their public water source. For years, Oahu residents, especially the Kanaka Lihue, have been raising the alarm about the Red Hill fuel storage facility being so close to the aquifer. The system pumping fuel from Red Hill into Pearl Harbor is some 70 years old and not well maintained, regardless of the never-ending platitudes the Navy and the Environmental Protection Agency has offered to the public, thus saying otherwise. The Environmental Protection Agency in 2017 communicated that millions of gallons of fuel stored in a military facility under Red Hill is unlikely to reach the water supply. It is very unlikely that the contamination that mass we're seeing under the tanks gets anywhere near the Board of Water Supply wells. Stephen Linder of the Environmental Protection Agency told the state Health Department Underground Fuel Tank Advisory Committee. This was a statement released by the Environmental Protection Agency in 2017 in response to a prior fuel leak that happened in 2014, which resulted in a loss of 27,000 gallons of fuel. On November 28, 2021, after reports of service members living at the Pearl Harbor Naval Base reported smelling gasoline in their water, with additional reports indicating that residents were also suffering from nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, and headaches, the Navy would shut down the well linking Red Hill to Pearl Harbor. Over 1,000 military families had to be relocated from the Pearl Harbor Naval Base to hotels. Some 2,700 households spanning across 10 communities were also in the affected area. Testing on a water sample conducted on December 5th, 2021 in a California laboratory would reveal 140,000 parts per billion of total petroleum, hydrocarbons, diesel, and vapors in the water sample. The Department of Health environmental action level is 400 parts per billion, or in other terms, the test results from December 5th have revealed a water sample that was 350 times the level the health department considers safe. In response to this infrastructural failure where gasoline has seeped from the fuel holding facility into the groundwater, the Hawaii Department of Health has instructed residents of Oahu to reduce water consumption to avoid being, poisoned by exposure to what is now a tainted water supply. Folks, and I will say this bluntly, this is not a water crisis that is on par with Flint, Michigan. Horrible as the situation was with Flint, where lead was found contaminating Flint's water supply, Flint's population is around 94,000 people. This is a situation that potentially far exceeds the severity of the crisis of Flint even, as the island of Oahu has a population of slightly over 1 million people, roughly half the population that resides within the entirety of the Hawaiian Islands resides on Oahu. This borderlines an apocalyptic scenario where if the fuel tanks are not drained and removed as soon as possible, the Red Hill Aquifer could potentially be contaminated with gasoline for decades. What more, Oahu's, and by extension the entire area that encompasses all of Hawaii, is one of the most geographically isolated areas on Earth, smack dab in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, surrounded by non-potable salt water. Imagine that. Imagine fresh water having to be shipped into Oahu every day, along with everything else that is shipped in by the shipping monopoly that is Matson Incorporated, a former subsidiary of Alexander and Baldwin. They are one of the last remaining big five companies to more or less monopolize the financial and real estate interests as they pertain to Hawaii, and which could potentially gain a monopoly over fresh water being imported into Oahu via everywhere else for public consumption. No private company should monopolize and profit from a basic human right which should be collectively owned in common trust by the public. On March 7, 2022, the Secretary of the Navy, Lloyd Austin, has ordered the Red Hill fuel storage facility to be defueled and put out of commission. That sounds like a victory there, but wait, there's more. However, it is expected that the defueling process will take up to a year to be completed, but with each passing day until that time, gasoline continues to trickle into the aquifer, and the situation as relative to the purity of the Red Hill Aquifer becomes more untenable with each passing day. Since that time, the Biden administration has preferred to allocate $800 billion worth of capital and resources to subsidize and protect the neoliberal Ukrainian regime, and has not yet allocated one single dollar to provide remedy to the Oahu water crisis. What more, the fake state government, as the Kanaka Lahui terms such, at present, controlled by the Democratic Party, ethnically comprised of the Caucasian and Japanese liberal petty bourgeois and professional class, will continue to provide endless platitudes and endless lip service to the beleaguered populace of Oahu, that they will provide immediate remedy to the problem as soon as possible. Okay, but as usual, rather than utilizing the power of a well-funded centralized state to correct these problems with the swiftness of a mongoose, folks from Hawaii would get that reference, they choose to deliberately act with the swiftness of a sloth, withholding all revenues accumulated through domestic taxation, tourism, and federal subsidization of the military, never ceasing to scheme up of ways and excuses for the private sector to pick up the tab and profit from social, environmental, and economic crisis that plagues Hawaii instead. The Democratic Party machine of Hawaii, specifically within Honolulu, with Mufi Hanneman acting as the ringleader, is no better than the Republican Party of Hawaii. And in fact, quite frankly, having been personally of witness to how things are run out there, because I've been out there quite a few times, the Democratic Party machine within Honolulu epitomizes a level of corruption which, by a nose, is only second to the level of corruption epitomized by New York City's infamous Tammany Hall under the regime of boss William M. Tweed. People who live outside of the Hawaiian Islands and who have never been there would have no idea that such a level of corruption exists in what appears to aesthetically be paradise. The truth is, paradise is in trouble, grave trouble. And if this corrupt machine is not pressed, challenged, or broken up, and they should be broken up, then they will continue to sell off every inch by piecemeal and every resource of the Aina to private interests until there is nothing left to sell. At present, while there have been a few mainstream media outlets which have provided coverage which vaguely illustrate this water crisis of potentially biblical proportions, for the most part, 1% owned Western mainstream media, that would be CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, more so often than not are guilty of looking the other way relative to any humanitarian, economic, or environmental crisis that presents itself to the denizens who reside within the Hawaiian Islands. However, this act of willful negligence is not strictly the domain of Western mainstream media outlets. The progressive outlets, Vox, The Atlantic, Vice, and the Young Turks additionally provide very basic, not in-depth coverage relative to Hawaii's economic, humanitarian, and environmental conundrums. As far as the YouTube collective known as BreadTube, Vosh, Destiny, Thought Slime, ContraPoints of the sort, you will hear nothing at all. While it is true that with any issue that pertains internally within the Aina itself, causes and initiatives should be spearheaded and led by the Kanaka Lāhui, at the same time, the Kanaka Lāhui is still geographically cut off and, save for the internet, isolated from forming and establishing strong connections and coalitions outside of Polynesia and Oceania. As a result, there is a gap of misunderstanding and unintentional ignorance relative to the severity of the crisis and the problems that the Kanaka Lāhui and the non-Kanaka working class within Hawaii faces on a day-to-day basis. If there is any people who critically require international proletarian solidarity, it is the Kanaka Māoli. Over the past few months, as the Oahu water crisis continues to unfold, left-wing groups outside of Hawaii, which are traditionally supposed to advocate on behalf of the marginalized, right? They have remained chillingly quiet. Communist Party USA has delegated far more time attacking those who identify as orthodox Marxist-Leninists who don't subscribe to postmodern theory than voice concern for what is happening in Hawaii. The industrial workers of the world, which I am a member of, technically, the Workers' World Party, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. All of them have said nothing. The progressives and the liberals within the United States continue to advance the Reaganite neoconservative agenda of banging the war drums against Russia and continue to worry far much more about what's happening in Ukraine than show one shred of concern about the citizens of Hawaii. The orthodox Marxist-Leninists and orthodox socialists, they're slowly coming around to awareness of the Oahu water crisis, but I do feel a lot of it goes over their heads. But still, they continue to fend off the non-stop castigations launched upon them by radical liberals, by the way, who also say very little about Hawaii. I personally find this to be unacceptable. There is very little outside solidarity being expressed for the Kanaka Lihue and the non-Kanaka working class of Oahu as they presently face the largest environmental infrastructural crisis that has presented itself in the modern era, and during a time when they literally could use all the outside international proletarian solidarity and support, allies and comrades that could be mustered up and conceived of. Post-Manic episode, I have distanced myself from direct advocacy of the Aloha Aina cause to focus on my recovery. That's why I've been quiet for a while. As conditions have become more dire, this present time I have come to the determination that the time is right for me to resume in my advocacy for the causes that relate to the struggle for the liberation of the Hawaiian kingdom from the dictatorship of the free market and private capitalist interests. However, I am just one somewhat controversial, I understand, personality outside the Kanaka Lihue, outside of Hawaii, pressing this issue outside of Hawaii. There needs to be more people involved. So I ask that every anti-imperialist, every Marxist, orthodox or postmodern, potato or patata, every anti-war activist, every so-called leftist outside of Hawaii allocate a little bit of their time in applying external pressure upon the United States Navy and the corrupt Hawaiian democratic political machine to move immediately into fueling the Red Hill fuel storage facility. Not by next year, but as soon as possible. And with the technological capabilities of the 21st century, because this is 2022, not 1922, but, don't tell that to the Hawaiian Democratic Party, or the Republican Party for that matter. This can be accomplished sooner rather than later. Relative to the internal situation within Oahu itself, quite honestly, I am not in a position to spearhead or lead any cause on behalf of the Kanaka Lihue. However, please permit me, as a comrade to the Aloha Aina cause, the privilege of making some suggestions. Due to the slowness of the fake state to act efficiently and accordingly, due to the federal government not properly allocating the resources and capital necessary to clean up their mess that contaminates your why, with the Navy continuing to beat around the bush, folks, the time is fast approaching where mass public escalation, mobilization, and direct action is required as a means for self-defense and self-preservation. This is a life and death matter. This should come in the form of strikes, work stoppages, disruptions of capital flow within the tourism industry, the choking off of critical infrastructure to prevent tourists from going to and fro. The city of Honolulu, the entire island of Oahu, should be brought to a standstill and should be brought to a grinding halt. And history has provided a blueprint to what should be done. On May 1st, 1949, and it is not lost on me that those of you in Hawaii refer to May 1st as Lay Day, but to us Reds, if you get what I'm saying, May 1st to us is May Day, the International Workers' Labor Day, a day of direct action. Some 5,000 dock workers initiated a 177-day strike and, save for food and medical supplies, closed off the port of Honolulu from imports and exports. On 28th May 1949, 12 striking stevedores were arrested for upsetting automobiles. The picket line obstructed the vehicle's ability to pass the pier in order to retrieve goods from the ships. Oh, the humanity! On July 16th, 1949, police arrested 96 Hawaiians for forming a picket line that would not allow scab workers to begin working on Pier 29. In late July, some 300 people stormed the offices of the scab organization, Hawaii Stevedore Limited. A violent response followed, which led to strikers, scabs, and police inflicting injury upon one another. 24 people in all were injured. Police arrested 34 strikers and charged them with assault. However, despite all this chaos and controversy, after 177 days of striking, the Big Five dictatorship lost out on millions upon millions of dollars as a direct result of the strike, and a settlement including a mere 32-cent raise was won, along with the right to have a third party arbitrate between capital and labor to determine fair wages. The present crisis that impacts and affects the fresh water supply for almost over 1 million persons residing within Oahu requires action that rivals or even exceeds the 177-day strike that occurred in 1949. A mass mobilization is needed to press the fake states and the Navy into acting not tomorrow, not next month, not next year, but today. Today. In addition to such, it should be the responsibility of the fake state and the Navy, not private capital interests, to subsidize water treatment infrastructure owned by the public to ensure that everyone within Oahu has pure water at the moment they turn the faucets. Do not let the fake state allow for Matson or Amazon or Alexander and Baldwin to form any sinister machinations as a means to profit from your collective suffering. This requires people power, not corporate power. However, this is merely a suggestion rooted in historical precedents. Whatever method or course of action the Kanaka-Lāhui wishes to pursue, it is solely up to the collective discretion of the Lāhui, especially the Kupuna. And those of us outside of the parameters of the Lāhui must unconditionally support whatever decision and whatever due course of action the Lāhui decides upon, whether it is passive or disruptive. In closing, and I stress this with the utmost amount of urgency, those of us who are committed to social and economic justice must do our work to advocate for those battling the current water crisis that has descended upon the island of Oahu. Our voices must be adamant and forthright in pressing the issue, whether it be in person or on social media, to raise awareness to the general public that there are a people isolated from the rest of the world who are at the moment in dire need of any outside solidarity and support they can get and muster as they are preparing to engage in mass struggle to fight for and preserve the integrity of their most precious and scarce natural resource, the way. To the Kanaka-Lāhui, while it is not lost on me that I may be a controversial figure to some of you, and this pertains to my 2019 Manic episode, you nonetheless have my unconditional aloha. The Aina also has my unconditional aloha, and I will do whatever I can to continue advocating for the struggle and the emancipation of the Hawaiian Kingdom from the dictatorship of private capital. Everyone, let us get to work, internally within Hawaii and externally elsewhere, and facilitate a speedy end to the Oahu water crisis. This cannot wait another day. This is Comrade Pella, signing out.